Thanks for listening to the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry, here to help educate, motivate, and put you on the right path to take control of your health through weekly discussions on topics in the medical field, public health arena, and in your community. And now your host, Dr. Barry.
What's up, everybody? You are now listening to the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry. I'm your host, Dr. Barry Pierre, favorite board-certified internist, founder of drpierresblog.com, and the host of the #1 podcast for patient advocacy, helping you empower yourself for better health. This week, we bring you episode 79, and I asked a question, right? And really, I kind of go into detail about this recent report from Medscape, which, unless you're really in the medical field, you're not really familiar with this organization, but they did a survey, right? They surveyed some residents and they asked what were some of the biggest issues they were facing today, right? So we're going to be talking about this survey. We're going to be talking about lifestyle and happiness associated with residency and what some of your future doctors are kind of dealing with right now and how that may look out for you when they become your actual doctors, quote unquote, right? And I hate to say actual doctors, right? Because honestly, the second you graduate medical school, you are a physician, right? You may not be board certified, but you are a physician. And we're going to be talking about what to expect in the future with some of the issues that they're dealing with today, right? Because that's important, right? I always joke with my patients, right? But if you have an a-hole physician, right? That person didn't just become an a-hole because they became a doctor. No, like they were likely a-holes during medical school. They were likely a-holes, and again, we're trying to keep it PG-13 on the podcast, right? They were likely a-holes as a pre-medical student. They were probably a-holes even when in high school, right? Like that isn't a trait that you get when you become a physician, right? Like if you're a terrible person, you're likely going to be a terrible person who just happens to be a physician, right? So we're going to go into some detail on some of the biggest issues residents are facing today and what that means for you in the future. Like always, please, if you want my show notes, head over to drpierresblog.com/LLP079 or lunchlearnpod.com, and you'll get the show notes for all of the podcast episodes. So you guys have a great and blessed day. And before we get out of here, of course, I like to read some of our 5-star reviews. Again, keep them coming. It's been absolutely amazing, the feedback that we've been getting from you guys, right? So username Leaf of Life says that the podcast is informative, empowering, with educated health sermons that are not taught on Sunday mornings, right? Absolutely love it. Like I said, keep bringing those 5-star reviews coming, and I will keep shouting you guys out. Your support is much appreciated. So sit back, let's get ready for another amazing episode here on the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry. This episode is brought to you by the Lunch and Learn Community Store, where we are living out the motto, empower yourself for better health. In the Lunch and Learn Community Store, you can get your favorite t-shirts, ebooks, as well as other related products by Dr. Barry. Head over to shop.drpierresblog.com and get a chance to get 10% off your first purchase by using the coupon code EMPOWER10. Again, shop.drpierresblog.com. Live out the motto, empower yourself for better health. All right, guys, so before we get into today's episode, right, like I don't want to just assume that everyone is up to date with the terminology that we're going to be talking about during this episode, right? We're talking about residents, we're talking about medical residents, whether it be first year, second years, third years, and the study that I'm actually going to be talking about went all the way up to 7 years, right? So these are people who have been out of medical school and are in their training process, right? Because I think a lot of times we're not very familiar, especially the general public, isn't really aware that after you finish your medical school, you still have to do additional training, right? That's why, a person can be in school, they say for, 11 years, right? 14 years, right? Because yes, they can do undergrad for 4, but then they got to do medical school for 4, but then they got to do the real training, right? So whether they're going to be an internist, whether they're going to be a family med physician, whether they're going to be a surgeon or dermatologist, they have to do additional training specifically in that field, right? So that's where your career, especially after high school, in the educational world, can go from 8 to 11 years, right? Because you got to spend so much time after the fact to get specifically trained in the specialty you want, right? So the study we're going to be talking about today, right, was done by Medscape, and it looked at the lifestyle and happiness of residents, right? Again, from first year to I believe 7th year, right? And so that's where we're at, right? We're talking to the people who will be taking care of you, and depending on where you're at, who's probably taking care of you right now, right? I don't think a lot of people realize like how many resident physicians are out there taking care of their loved ones as we speak, right? And again, unless you're just listening to the podcast, I am a program director at Wellington Regional Medical Center of an internal medicine program. We have 18 medicine residents. I also teach them medical. I also have medical students as well, but today we're talking about residents. So we have 18 medicine residents in my program. So I understand, quite closely like what it means, right? To be experiencing lifestyle on both sides, right? Whether when I was a resident, which again wasn't too long ago, right? I just got out of residency in 2014, right? So I've been out of residency, not even 5 years out of residency, and now I'm a program director, right? So I get to see the transformation of a resident who comes in, the first day of their post medical school training, and they don't really know anything, they're not confident to the 3rd year, right when they're about to graduate, right? Like I see that confidence transformation, and a lot of things happen, right? Like I tell people all the time, for those who are outside of medicine, one of the biggest concerns, right, that I always have is that the amount of stress that kind of goes on during your training program, and understanding that life continues to go on while you're in this like vacuum, right? Because that's really what it is, right? When you're in medical school, when you're in residency, you're in this vacuum of just learning and more learning that you thought you could ever do, right? But you know what? If you check your Facebook, if you check your Twitter, you check your LinkedIn, like people are still, living life around you, but you're kind of still in this study mode. So, and it's sometimes very difficult just kind of looking on the outside in and realizing like, hey, people are having quote unquote fun, and I'm still, 4 years after medical, I'm 4 years after undergrad, 5 years after undergrad, 7 years after undergrad. I'm still in the quote unquote training to try to get to my career, like even start my career. So I think that's kind of where we're at, right? So I want you guys to kind of get the mindset the people who got surveyed in this Medscape review, right? And it was an online survey. They sent it out to about 25 different residencies. About 1,900 people responded, right? Which isn't too crazy. I can tell you, I've gotten some of these emails and say, no, I don't have time for 10 minutes. Especially 10 minutes may be a long time for some folks, right? So they got 1,900 people to respond to various questions on their happiness, various questions on their lifestyle. And, with this podcast, I stress the importance of mental health, right? Because there's a lot of people whose mental is not stable, whose foundation is not concrete, who are tasked to save lives on a day-to-day basis, right? And that's important for me, right? Because again, if you're responsible for taking care of my mom, my family members, my girl, like if you're responsible for taking care of them, I want you to be in the mental capacity to do so, right? And sometimes, unfortunately, right, especially when we're going to talk about some of these results from this study, fortunately, that's not always the case. Right. So let's go in the first part, right? So they asked what were some of the biggest challenges associated with residency, and we're going to talk about the top 3 and talk about the bottom 3, and I'm going to kind of give you my contention or my concern, I guess, right? So the top 3 biggest challenges that residents are facing today, per the study, per the survey, is work-life balance, right? So about a third of the respondents said that the work-life balance was the biggest challenge for it, right? And I kind of alluded to that earlier when I said, hey, you know what? Life is happening around you, but you got so much work that has to be done. You almost don't have time to deal with it, right? You almost have to kind of shut yourself out and shut yourself away from the world just so you can get what you need to get during this training program. Dealing with time pressures, right? Time management is an issue that I try to preach to my pre-meds, right? And I try to say, hey, I know you think you do a lot of work right now, but I want you to imagine all that work you did in like a semester, right? And then to have 4 weeks to do that same amount of work, right? Like that's kind of like what medical school is. And when you think about residency, it takes it up even higher notch, right? So dealing with time pressure is a big issue for residents. And then the fear of failure and making a mistake, right? again, I jokingly say this, right? But I think as a physician, we are one of the few fields, right, that has to be correct 100% of the time, or someone's life can depend on it, right? 100% of the time, right? So imagine going to your job, right? For example, let's think about my fast food folks, right? When someone forgets to take off the cheese off my hamburger, right? Whatever, right? If they forget to take the cheese off my hamburger, right? That could be life, but it's usually not a life or death thing, right? But if I mismanage a patient, right? Like that could be someone's grandma who doesn't come home, right? If I mismanage my patient, right, that could be someone's dad who does not come home, right? That could be someone's daughter who does not come home, right? Like the stress level associated with the decision making, especially as a resident and as a physician in general, is so huge. Right, so I think it's we have to really kind of hit home and make sure we understand the level of importance that we're talking here. Right, if you make a mistake, someone dies. Right, that's a reality for a lot of medicine residents, especially medicine. Right, but just residents in general. Right, if you make a mistake, someone can die, and that's a heavy burden. Right, and you got about 15% of those who answered the survey thought the fear of failure was a big issue for them. So I'm going to talk about the bottom three, right? Where were some issues that, it's an issue, but none that I'm really stressing, like at this point. Number one, dealing with patient death, right? And I hate to say that, it's crazy to me to think that dealing with death is low, right? And so low, only 2% of the people thought it was an issue, right? So think about that, right? And again, I talk to my friends all the time, and I talk to people online who talk about just how physicians are able to kind of turn it on and turn it off when it comes to death. And sometimes we forget to turn it on. Sometimes we forget to turn it off, right? Sometimes we're so, unbothered. I hate to say it like that, but we're so unbothered by death, right? That it even bleeds into your personal life, right? So even in your personal life, when death is happening, you're like, okay, it was for the better, right? Like it's like we've just so casually accepted death that only 2% of the people, only 2% of these residents feel like that's even an issue that they gotta deal with, right? Like I said, the time pressures, right, are much more of a concern for them than dealing with a patient's death, right? Like, and that's just almost mind-boggling to me. I was in our private Facebook group, and again, if you want to join, it's drpierresblog.com/community. I was in our private Facebook group, and I posted one of the graphics from the survey, and I said, "Wow, look at this! Like, only 2% of people think death is an actual issue." Right? And again, I had a couple of my physician friends. They say, "Yeah, I agree." Because they say, hey, we just kind of get used to it. We kind of, go through the fire. And then after a while, death does not bother us, right? So, again, I'm taken aback, right? Because, I would think, right? I would think a person dying, right? Again, like, especially when I think about if the fear of failure is in your top three, right? Remember, if you fail, someone can die. So, essentially, they're saying, like, that fear of, making a mistake is a huge issue for me. But if they die, right, like that's kind of what they're kind of washing their hands, right? They're saying, yes, I'm really scared to make that mistake, right? Like, and in medicine, right, we talk about this a lot when we talk about defensive medicine, right, where we're ordering a whole bunch of BS tests, right? Not because we think the test is going to be positive, right? We order this BS test because we don't want to get sued later on, right? We don't want to make a mistake and forget something. We don't want to make a mistake and miss something that we could have missed, right? But what it shows with this survey, right, and I think this is telling, especially after they graduate, that after we make the mistake, if we make it, we're like, oh, well, I'm sorry, Grandma, Joe's not going to be here, right? Like that's kind of like how, like then I was shocked, right, when I saw how low the death aspect of it, right? Your relationships with your attendings, which is in the medical speak, is like your supervisors, right? Like when you're a medicine resident, right? Again, I like to talk about medicine, right? When you're a medicine resident, and any resident has this, right? But when you're a resident, you have those who already went through residency, already got board certified, and they're kind of like your supervisors, right? So we call those attending physicians. So when you're a resident, the relationship between you and your attending physician doesn't really raise a blip as far as concern in a lot of these respondents' course, right? And then dealing with stress, right? And I have some licensed mental health therapists in the private Facebook group, and so they ask, they're like, "Well, do you guys get any type of emotional type training or anything that goes on?" And I'm like, "No." Right? Like, again, we're just, I think, used to dealing with it. We're just used to the understanding that death is going to come, that it doesn't even register that it's actually not a normal thing, right? Like, it doesn't even register to us because, so my attending told me, like, hey, you could do everything you can and your patient's still going to die. And once you accept that, you'll be a better physician, right? Again, that was the exact phrase I got from my attendings when I was a resident, right? Like, you can do all that you want and someone could still die, right? So again, that's a big thing, right? So again, that was just the first issue, right, associated with this survey, which I thought was a big issue, right? We're scared to make that mistake, but if we make that mistake and someone dies, we're like, okay, all right, on to the next patient. Let me go admit somebody else. Bullying was a concern for a lot of residents, and the top three people who tend to bully attendings. Again, we talked about the attending physician, right? Again, even though their relationship with the attending physicians isn't that big of an issue, the same people said that when it comes to bullying, their attendings are usually the biggest culprit. Number two is funny, right? Because number two, for sure, I would have thought would have been other residents, right? So if your attendings are the one bullying you, right, and that's number one, right? I would have figured number two would have been other residents, right? But number two is actually nurses, right? And I'll tell my little personal story, right? First of all, the nurses following me, the nurses who listen to the podcast, please, I love all you guys, right? This is not a slight against the nurses, right? But some of y'all can be very mean. Some of y'all can be very mean to residents, right? And I understand, you guys go through every year where you go through a whole new regime change every year where you got to relearn new names, relearn new teaching styles, relearn and try to teach these former medical students, right? Who were just medical students like a month ago, and now they're resident physicians, right? And you got to go through their ups and downs with them, right? I know that can be frustrating, but in this survey, you guys were listed number 2 as the biggest bullies in the hospital, right? I thought it was funny, but I know there's some truth to it, especially my ICU nurses, right? Again, I love the nurses, right? Let me put that disclaimer here. Dr. Barry loves the nurses, but you guys can be bullies. And then number 3 were other residents, especially senior residents, right? So again, attendings, nurses, and other residents were the top 3 concerns when it comes to bullying as a resident. So the next segment asked about depression. 33% of residents surveyed felt depression at some time throughout their residency. 10% of those, again, this is outside of 33%, right? So 33% felt sometimes I'm dealing with pressure throughout my residency. 10% felt they dealt with depression the whole time, right? The whole time they were in residency, they felt depressed. With 10% of respondents feeling that having thoughts about suicide, right? Or even attempting, right? So the question asked, were there thoughts about suicide or attempts of suicide, right? So that was like one kind of bundled question, right? And 10% of the response, again, remember we had 1,900 people, 10% have thought about suicide or have attempted it at one point, right? And that's an issue, right? Like, I think that, that really kind of plays back into that mental health, and that plays back into that first question that the therapist asked in the group, right? Where they say, like, don't you guys get any type of training in the emotional intelligence, right? Don't you guys get any type of training in just like the therapy in general, what that means? And the answer is no. Right. And again, I can just speak for my program, but that is something that, once she brought that up, I said, you know what, I need to look into this because this is going to be important moving forward. We talked about the suggestions, right, on avoiding burnout, right? Like they asked them like, well, because burnout is a very real thing right now. And burnout used to be this issue that we dealt with in the older physician population. Right, where we, after, they turn 50 and 60 and they're like, I'm done with medicine. But we're getting much younger physicians talking about burnout at such a higher rate that there's a big concern, right? Like there's already a physician shortage, right? There's already a shortage of physicians here in the United States, right? And you have more and more younger physicians saying, you know what, I'm not going to be doing this for 40 years. right? I'm not going to be doing this for 50 years, right? Like, I'm not going to be doing this till I'm 70, right? You have physicians who are getting out of medical school, getting out of residency, and within 5 and 10 years, they're like, I'm done, right? Like, so, and again, I know I'm a different case, right? Like, I knew I wanted to be a physician probably since I was in elementary school, right? So that's what, like 8, 9 years old, right? 8, 9 years old, right? I'm 35 right now. So imagine, like, knowing I want to be a physician since the age of 9, right? And when I get 26 years down the line, I become said physician. And then in 10 years, I'm like, or in 5 years, I'm like, yeah, you know what? This is not for me. Or, you know what, this isn't what I thought it would be. I'm out of here, right? Like, that's tough, right? Because again, I talk about I've talked about it before, the lost decade. I think I wrote a blog about it, where my 20s, I didn't do anything during my 20s, right? Like, for example, the significant quote unquote birthdays, right? Like 21, 25. I know exactly what I was doing, right? My birthday's in December, right? So we usually have final exams around that time, right? So 21st birthday, I was studying for organic chemistry. 25th birthday, I think I was studying for like some other chemistry or physiology anatomy test, right? Like that's my highlight of my 20s, right? Studying for a final exam. I don't remember any other stuff during my 20s, right? I was in school. I graduated high school 18. From 18 to about 22, 23, I was in undergrad. 23 to like 27 or 28, I think I was in medical school. And then from 27 to 30, I was in, yeah, so like, you know, the time was gone, right? That decade's out of there, right? Like, I'm trying to play catch up on the fun I should have had there in my 20s because all I was doing was busy studying, right? So we have burnout is very real for a lot of resident physicians, right? And we're even starting to see that same type of pattern even trickle back down to the medical students, right? So sooner or later, right, you're going to have such a higher turnover for our physician workforce that we're going to be in trouble, right? So again, something to think about, right? So they said, what can we do, right? What are some suggestions to try to mitigate some of these issues, right? One was, having manageable work schedules, right? Again, we talked about this work-life balance, right? Where they felt that they had to do too much work and they couldn't celebrate enough life outside of work, right? So that was a big stressor for them. Sufficient compensation, right? Like, this is big, and it's kind of funny to me too, right? Because my residents probably talk about it, once a month. Right? Like, hey, can we get paid more? Trust me, I understand, right? Like, especially most medical students don't work during medical school, right? So they spend a lot of time not making a lot of money, borrowing a lot of money. And when they become a resident, right, and they get paid. It's not like they don't get paid, right? And you have to remember, especially and I tell my friends, right, in the medical world, the cost, right? Cost is such a different conversation with them, right? Like, if I had cost discussions, right, with people outside of medicine, right, they would look at me crazy. So, you're a resident. I'm in South Florida, right? So I think my residents get paid like $48 for the first year, $50 for the second year, and I think $52 for their third year, right? And for a majority of Americans, that's a good, healthy salary, right? But for the residents, because when you factor in all of the hours that they work, it's like less than $10 an hour, right? So again, these guys are by law, I can work them 80 hours a week, right? So I can work them 80 hours a week and they make like $48 a year, right? And the cost of living I'm in South Florida, so cost of living is crazy high. So, if they say, man, if we just got paid more, right, so we didn't necessarily have to worry about bills while we're trying to do our training, right, that'd be much better, right? So that's an issue, that's a concern. And some of them talked about reasonable caseloads, right? So this is, again, that time management where, they may have a lot of patients, a lot of cases, a lot of things that they may have to do during that short time frame, right? So if they had some reasonable caseloads, they may be able to, be a little bit less stressed and, have to worry about burnout a little bit less, right? And I think the big one, right, which I thought was important, right, was self-doubt. Right, this was actually, a chart among itself, right? Almost 50% of the people doubt their ability. And as a resident physician, your confidence is what will take you to the next level, right? And 50% of residents at some time during our residency really doubted their ability to be a good resident physician. Now, hopefully, in the plan, right, is by the time they become a third year and they're about to graduate, or the sixth year and they're about to graduate, by the time they're about to finish residency, we hope that jitter is out of there. But it's important to understand, like, this is a real feeling that they go through, right? Again, remember, and I'm really trying to stress, especially for my Lunch and Learn listeners, right? Because especially in this time and age, if you go to work in a hospital, you're likely going to be taking, depending on, unless your hospital's in, like, this podunk town, right? You're likely going to be taken care of by a resident, right? Like, graduate medical education is becoming a huge thing, right? And I can go on my little soapbox in a little bit, right? But it's a very profitable thing for these hospitals, right? But we can discuss that later. Like, graduate medical education is becoming a huge thing. So you're having more and more hospitals that are opening up residencies within their hospital, right? So their patients, the majority of patients are being taken care of by a resident physician, right? Like, it's a real thing is happening, right? So the likelihood that you can go with during your health atmosphere, right, and not run into a resident one way or the other is kind of low, depending on where you're at, right? So that's something to think about. And again, a lot of these people are experiencing this self-doubt that we hope gets kind of taken care of before they finish their residency. And so I think, it's not all gloom, right? They ask, what is the most rewarding aspect of residency, right? Or what would you want to experience more? Clinical knowledge, right? The ability to learn was a very rewarding thing for residents, right? And they love it, right? And again, as a resident, again, especially for my first years, right? You were just a medical student a couple months ago. And now you're a resident, now you're a physician, now you're in charge of taking care of someone's grandma, granddad, son, daughter, mom. Like, you're in charge of taking care of someone, family's loved one. And it's a rewarding thing to understand that you are going to help that person, right, walk out the hospital, right? You are going to help that person have that best surgery, right? You are going to help that person, find the right medication, diagnose the right test on image. Like, you are going to be responsible for that, right? And that's a very rewarding thing for physicians. Another thing, they gain that experience, right? Again, there's not too many jobs that you'll have this very on the field experience where they're also paying you as well too, right? So you get the gain experience and you get paid a little bit. It's not a lot, but you do get paid. And I think the most important thing, especially for me, is the gratitude that you get from your patients, right? Patients absolutely love residents because residents, I'll agree, right, tend to take a little bit more time with them, right? And it's because, they're still trying to learn, right? So they want to know what questions they should ask, what shouldn't ask, right? They want to know nitty-gritty everything. And if you take care of medical students, right? If you supervise medical students, they love medical students even more because medical students ask a million questions. Sometimes they ask too many questions, right? And I have to, educate them on the best way to, ask your questions to be efficient. But, the patients love when people spend time with them. And resident physicians tend to spend a lot of time with their patients, right? I'm a hospitalist, right? In I guess I would say a non-traditional sense, because I'm the type of hospitalist that I may see in the morning, but I may not leave that hospital the whole day, right? So there's a chance you may see me later on that day. But there's a lot of hospitals that, hey, I see you early in that morning, and I'm not seeing you till tomorrow, right? So, but as a resident is there all day. So, they're constantly popping in, popping out to try to make sure that patient is well taken care of. So definitely, something to look forward to, as a resident, right? That gratitude that you get from your patients, right? Whether the result be good or bad, right? Like, again, I've had results that didn't end in the best of light, right? But the family was so appreciative of the amount of work that I put in to try to take care of the loved one. Like, they love me all the same, right? So again, it's kind of that catch-22, right? Like, yes, we want to have a successful, turn of events every time a patient walks in the hospital, but that's not always the case. And because that's always the case, being able to still get that gratitude from that family saying, hey, you did everything you can, thank you, is very rewarding. All right. So again, I think especially those were some of the biggest points from this survey, right? But I try to stress to the Lunch and Learn community, folks that are starting to empower themselves with better health, starting to go to the doctor, starting to go to the gym, starting to look at what they're eating, right? I want you guys to feel empowered when you go and you're being taken care of by these physicians, right? And because remember, they're physicians, but they're learning too, right? I tell people all the time, I tell my residents all the time, the reason why I didn't do family medicine or like OB or something, right? It's because when I was a medical student, I used to always get kicked out of the rooms, right? They were like, oh, he's a student? No, kick him out of the room. I don't want him in the room, right? And it almost like it was like a stab in the heart, right? Like, ooh, okay, all right, no problem. So I went into internal medicine, right? Why? So I can avoid dealing with women's health, right? So I don't do, like, you ask me, I don't do none of that women. Like, I take care of women, of course, right? But like women's health, that OB-GYN type questions and stuff like that, that's not me. Right? Because like I got kicked out of the room so often that I made it a point when I was going to finish medical school that I was not going to have to take care of them. Right? And that was like that was my get back. Like, hey, you kicked me out the rooms. I'm not going to take care of you. Right? I'm going into internal medicine. Right? And for those who don't know, internal medicine, we really don't be dealing with women's health like that. I can tell you as a resident, I did 1 month of women's health as an intern, and that was it. And even funny, even when I was a resident, they were still kicking me out the room, right? They were kicking me out of the rooms when I was a medical student. They kicked me out of the room when I was a resident, and they just confirmed that I don't need to be dealing with women's health and doing pap smears and all that. Nah, keep that for my family medicine folks, right? Like that's what about OBs, right? That's what they're for. Right. So when next time, right, and I want you to think, next time you're in the hospital, next time you're in your doctor's office and you see medical students or you see residents, right, like, don't just kick them out the room, right? They need to learn as well because, again, they got a lot of stuff. Again, we just talked about it. They got a lot of stuff going on. Right. So give them a chance to learn, give them that chance to, give back. Right. Because that's what they're here there for. They want to give back to the community. Right. So they want to be able to take care of you. Right. So let them take care of you. Let them ask all the questions. I know it seems like a lot. I know your time is busy. But, show them that gratitude. Say, hey, you know what? I was listening to Dr. Barry's podcast, and he said, you know what? You guys are going through a lot as a resident. So, take your time. Don't feel rushed, and I'm here for you, right? Like, that's if you get anything from this week's podcast, right, is that Dr. Barry wants you to show love to the medical students and residents who are at your doctor's offices, who are in your hospital. Like, show love to them because they got a lot of stuff going on, and they're still taking care of you, right? I don't want to say at the kindness of their heart. They're taking care because they got to, right? But they're doing all of their effort and they're allowing life to kind of happen around them, right? To make sure that they put that focus on you. And that's the end of this week's episode. You guys have a great and blessed day. I'm going to see you guys next week. Thank you for getting to the end of the show. I am your host, Dr. Barry Pierre, host of the Lunch Learn with Dr. Barry, and this is another amazing episode that we like to bring to you week after week on betterment of empowering yourself for better health today. If you have not had a chance, please go ahead and subscribe to the show. If this is your first time listening, if you already listen and you've already subscribed, make sure to leave me a 5-star review because your support is absolutely important in keeping the show moving as it is. And if you have not had a chance and you want to check out today's show notes, always head over to lunchlearnpod.com. That is lunchlearnpod, all in one word, .com, and you can get the access to my show notes for every single episode, but especially the one you just listened to. And I'm going to see you guys next week. You guys be blessed. Bye.